Hello, everyone. My name is Wes Bush, and today I am so happy to have Nir Eyal, who is the author of both Hooked and Indistractable. So I have been reading Nir's books religiously. They are incredible. And one of the things I love about them is he really just understands the customer and what really drives them to, whether it's use products and applications or even stop using them if they are taking control of your life. And so one of the things I love to just start off with is what really got you into writing books in general, Nir?
Yeah, so I write books when I'm looking for an answer I can't find. So that happened with Hooked. I had this hypothesis that as the digital interface shrinks, so as we've seen us go from desktops with big monitors to laptops to mobile devices and now to wearable devices and even audible devices, like if you think about the Amazon Alexa, there is no visual interface, right? There's no screen anymore. And so I had this hypothesis that back when I saw this happening in 2012, that as the interface shrinks, habits become increasingly important. And that a company's competitive advantage increasingly would depend upon their ability to create consumer habits. Because let's face it, if the customer doesn't remember to use your product these days, if you're not, top of mind, then for many products, you might as well not even exist. And so there are all types of competitive advantage, of course. This is what Warren Buffett calls a moat. So you can have intellectual property, you can have brand, you can have economies of scale. One of the most, I think, important types of competitive advantage, and I think one that is increasingly becoming utilized, is this idea of building a habit. For example, if you think about Google, why do we Google things every day, right? Google owns 90% of the search engine market. Is it because they make a better search engine? No. In fact, there's been studies that find that when you show people the search results of Google versus Bing, the number 2 search engine, and you strip out the branding so people can't see whose search results are which, it's a 50-50 preference split. People can't tell the difference between the two. And so why do people search with Google? Why has Googling become a verb? Well, it's because of habit and nothing more. There is nothing more than that habit. And so the incredible advantage of a consumer habit is that once a consumer has that habit in their mind, they have what I call this mind monopoly. They don't even consider the competition, right? So how amazing would that be if people used your product, your service, just out of habit? They used it automatically without even considering the competition. That's how much they liked it. That's how much they benefit from it. And if they could use that of habit, that would mean that you wouldn't have to spend all that money on expensive advertising. You wouldn't have to send them all those spammy, annoying messages. You could get them to use your product on their own with this habit formed.
Awesome. And I mean, unless you love sending those spammy messages, then power to you. For everyone else that wants to think about this a little bit smarter, I completely agree. Having that habit forming product is really powerful. But where do you really start whenever it comes to understanding? Like, obviously, there's the examples of Google and even like Netflix for, okay, I just want to chill and watch Netflix. Like, there's lots of verbs and companies that are kind of owning those terms and building habit forming products. But where do people start?
Yeah. So there are 4 steps to the hook model. It's a trigger, an action, a reward, and finally an investment. And the most important is the first step, which is to understand your consumers' triggers. Now, there are 2 types of triggers. There are, of course, the external triggers, which we just talked about, those annoying messages, the pings, the dings, the rings, which we do have to utilize at first in order to create a customer habit, to start sending people down the 4 steps of the hook model. However, the ultimate goal of a habit-forming product is to no longer need those external triggers. The ultimate goal of a habit-forming product is that people use a product because they want to, not because they feel like they have to. That's really when we've reached the promised land. And so the most important first step is to understand your customers' internal triggers. Now, internal triggers are these uncomfortable emotional states, these things that we feel that we seek to escape from. And one thing that our brain is incredibly good at is pattern matching. So whatever provides relief from that discomfort is what we will turn to time and again out of habit. So when we think about it, when we feel lonely, what do we go? Where do we go? What app or website? We check Facebook. When we're uncertain, we Google. When we're bored, we check stock prices, sports scores, the news. We look at Reddit, Pinterest, YouTube. All of these things cater to these uncomfortable emotional sensations. So what that means is for someone building a product or service whose business model requires a habit, if you want that competitive advantage of having your product used out of habit, well, then you have to ask yourself, what is the internal trigger that occurs frequently enough in your user or customer's life? What is that emotional itch? What is that psychological discomfort that they seek to escape that you are going to attach your product's use to? That's the most important place to start.
Awesome. And one of the things you mentioned that I think is so interesting is the internal triggers. And so for a lot of us, we have these internal triggers. And like you mentioned, like we're bored. We might check stock or our stocks or Facebook or some other application where we just naturally go to whenever we're feeling that particular feeling. Like how do people just find, like what are your internal triggers?
Yeah. So in the book, in Hooked, I talk about different methodologies to do this. There's what's called the 5 whys technique that came out of the Toyota production system, where what we're doing is we're asking ourselves and asking our customers these 5 whys of why they would use a product like ours. And so we don't stop with just a functional why, right? If it's email, it's say, why do you use email? Well, I want to send messages. Why? Why? And if you go down enough whys, you want to figure out what that sensation is, right? So with email, is it, I fear being out of the loop. I'm worried about what's going on at work, right? So when you start hearing emotions, that's when you know you've gotten to the internal triggers. Worry, fear, uncertainty, anxiety, fatigue, loneliness, all of these things are internal triggers. This is the beauty of what we do as product designers, as marketers. We solve people's pain. Right? That is the amazing charge that we have in our business, is that we get to solve people's problems. But you can't deal with those problems effectively unless you get to the root cause, unless you get to the internal trigger, not just the functional level, not just, oh, my customer wants an extra button here or there. That's very superficial. What you want to do is to get to that internal trigger, because it's only when you get to the feeling, when you get to the uncomfortable sensation, that you have your aperture opened up. Because if you start at too high a level, then your solution set is very limited, right? When you say, why do you use this product? Oh, I want to do X, Y, Z. Okay, well, then you're going to design a product that's pretty much like your competitor's product, right? But if you start at the base level, if you understand the feeling, if you understand the sensation that they are trying to escape, well, your option set expands, your aperture opens, and you have many more potential solutions for that problem when you can identify what that problem really is. And for every habit-forming product, it is fundamentally some kind of uncomfortable emotional state. And when you start from that base state, you'll find that there's all kinds of solutions that you can provide, particularly the ones that are the most habit-forming, that we find that something that quickly provides relief, that provides a user a greater sense of agency, control, that scratches that psychological itch quickly and effectively. Those are the kind of products that people return to time and time again, and the kind of products that we can build habits on top of, right? So we can build that core habit of, let's say, for it's an enterprise product, for example. My book is just as applicable to enterprise as consumer web products. So let's say checking the dashboard becomes a daily habit. Well, then once you have that habit established, you can layer on additional habits and additional habits, so that over time, now the customer has built a very rich set of behaviors that they do with your product. And of course, that makes the product very sticky. It makes them much less likely to churn. So they're going to keep staying your customer over the long term.
Definitely. And so I think for a lot of people, I think you hit on the nail on the head for the first part, where it was just describing like what a lot of companies do, where it's just describing, here's the functional outcome that we're going to help you with. And I think if you do aspire to just solving that, like it is so easy to become commoditized so quickly, especially nowadays, where it is so easy to create a lot of solutions, especially in the B2B SaaS space where a lot of the audience is in right now. And so for the other side of that, where it's talking more about the social and the even emotional outcomes that your product can solve for and how you can do that, how do you really understand like what it is that your product can do in addition to the functional outcomes?
Yeah, so there's a few ways. So we talked about the 5 whys technique. Another thing we can do is to look for nascent behaviors. So what is the customer currently doing with other solutions that is not good enough? So many times when I meet with startups, I'm an active angel investor. I've invested in dozens of companies now. And many times when I hear companies pitching their products, and I'll ask them, how does the customer currently solve this problem? they'll say, oh, there is no solution to this problem. And they think that's a good thing. And I'm always a little skeptical about that, because what does it probably mean if the customer doesn't have any way to solve this problem? It probably means it's not a problem. So what
Yeah.
you want to do is to look for what the customer is currently doing to solve this problem in a way that it requires too much effort. It's too laborious. There's too much friction. It's not satisfying enough. It doesn't really solve the problem. And then figure out how your solution can solve that problem in a much better way. But to get to answer that question, don't just stop with the functional answer. Start with the real consumer need. And that has to be something that occurs with sufficient frequency. So the number one reason that I don't invest in a company is because that's trying to form a habit. That's kind of my specialty, is I look for products both in enterprise, SaaS, consumer web, anything that needs repeat consumer engagement. That's my sweet spot. And the number one reason I will not invest in a company is because that behavior does not occur with sufficient frequency. So that's very, very important. So it's almost impossible to change a consumer habit if the behavior does not occur within a week's time or less. Okay. That doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad business. It just means that you have to acquire customers and keep customers in a different way. And not every business has to be habit forming. There's all kinds of competitive advantages. Many products don't lend themselves to be habit forming. For example, if you sell insurance, if you sell, some kind of enterprise software that's installed on a server farm somewhere and nobody uses it unless something disastrous happens, well, then you don't need a habit. You need a one-time sale. And so that doesn't require a habit. The problem is if you don't have a habit or some kind of other competitive advantage, then it's very easy for the competition to swoop in and take your customer away, right? They basically beat you up on price and features all day long. And so you're competing on those two aspects as opposed to having this consumer lock-in once you have a habit. Once a product is utilized every day, once a week, when it's a product that people interact with a lot, that's the kind of product that's very difficult to unseat. So when you think about Slack in the enterprise, GitHub, Salesforce, once you invest in one of these products, it's kind of sticky. It's hard to leave one of these products because you formed a consumer habit around it.
Absolutely. And so we've been talking a lot about so far how you could understand your customers' internal triggers and how to really use those to build your business. But one thing I'd like to kind of transition the conversation towards is ourselves. And so a lot of the people listening are in product and marketing. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on what people could do to become more indistractable in their roles, to really just take their work to the next level.
Yeah, absolutely. And so this is why I wrote Indistractable. So my first book was Hooked, about how to build habit-forming products. And the reason I wrote this book is not for the social media companies. They've known these techniques for years. My idea with Hooked was to democratize these techniques so that everyone out there, no one's getting addicted to SaaS software, right? No one's, so the problem is not that people underuse these type of products. The problem is people don't use them enough. And so that's really why I wrote Hooked, was to help the rest of us build the kind of products that people use because they want to, not because they have to. But then Indistractable is about this other challenge. Indistractable is about how do we as professionals make sure that we do what we say we're going to do? How is it that we sit down at our desk and we say we're going to do this big project, we say we're going to focus on that thing we've been procrastinating on, and yet we find ourselves checking email or talking to a colleague or doing something else to procrastinate as opposed to doing the thing we said we are going to do with our time. So becoming indistractable is really about four main steps. Number one, back to those internal triggers, right? It's about breaking these habits that aren't serving us. The first step is to master these internal triggers and to recognize, oh, I see, I'm reflexively using this product because of something I am feeling, right? Stress, anxiety, fatigue, loneliness, whatever it might be that I'm feeling, that's what's causing me to impulsively check email. That's why I can't get done the things that are important, and I'm always catering towards the urgent. So it's about mastering the internal trigger. It's about making time for traction, making sure that you have time in your calendar to do the things like to do focused work, to do the things that are important to you. And this, of course, applies in your personal life as well. Then we have to hack back the external triggers. We see that there are so many external triggers, not just from our devices, our computers, our phones, but also the terrible external triggers that come from superfluous meetings or too many emails or group chat. Or one of the worst sources of distraction is the open floor plan office. Terrible source of distraction. So I give everyone in the book, there's a screen sign that you can pull out. You put it on your computer monitor and actually tells your colleagues, I'm indistractable right now. Please come back later. So that comes inside every copy of Indistractable, because it turns out that the open floor plan office is just a huge source of distraction. And then the final step is to prevent distraction with PACT. And this is all about how we can use technology to block out tech distraction. So I talk about all kinds of tech tools that you can use to make sure that you don't succumb to doing something you don't want to do. And then another thing that's super important about this book is that I tackle the problem of distraction at the enterprise level. That, if you work in a company that doesn't respect your time, then it's very hard to not constantly get distracted, right? If your boss is calling you at 8 p.m. on a Friday night, if your colleagues are constantly tapping on you on your shoulder when you're at work, interrupting you from what you're doing, that is taking a severe toll on your work output. And so it behooves you to know how to change those aspects of your company. It turns out it's something we can do. I profile several companies who have actually changed their company culture, this dysfunctional company culture, and turned it into one where people are indistractable.
Yeah, and I think on that note too, one of the things I was actually thinking about your book when I was sending this one email on the weekends. So it was through Gmail, and there's this send later feature on Gmail that I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with. And since it was on the weekends, I clicked send later because I didn't want him to get the email during the weekends. And one of the options, the first one actually was sends at 8 a.m. on Monday. And I was like, that's perfect. That's exactly what I want to do. I don't want to disrupt his weekends because this isn't urgent. And so,
right. So there's lots of things you can do. I mean, people who have used Indistractable have told me, one person told me that they have reduced the time they spend on email by 90%, 90. By using some of these techniques. Send later is one of them, but there's also all kinds of other things you can do in terms of how you respond to email. There's this rule that says that most people don't realize that if you want to get fewer emails, you have to send fewer emails. So I tell you how to do that exactly.
Yeah, and I think one of the topics too for emails that I love to hear you explain, because you're going to explain it way better than me, in terms of just batching it. So you mentioned in the book in terms of like the ones you want to answer later that day, as well as later that week, and just understanding how to kind of triage email.
Sure. Yeah. So this will revolutionize your relationship with email. What we want to do when we get email, this is just one tip of the iceberg in terms of the different tactics we can use, but this one's very effective. So the most important thing when you get an email is to answer one question every time you check email, which is to understand very quickly, when does that email need a reply? Because it turns out most email, the problem with email where we waste the most time on it is not the checking or the replying, it's the rechecking. That's the problem. So we don't want to keep rechecking the emails, right? You've seen this. You open an email, you read it, you close it, you put it away. You open the next email, you read it, you close it away. Then 20 minutes later, you do the same thing again and again. You're doing it because of stress, anxiety. You want to know what's going on. So you keep wasting time touching the same message again and again and again. Instead, the rule should be you only want to touch each email 2 times. Once when you receive it, and a second time when you reply to it. So here's what you do. Every time you get an email, you need to quickly answer one question. When does this email need a reply? If it never needs a reply, you just delete it. If it needs a reply right this second, it's about 1% of your emails are, oh my God, this is super urgent, call me right away. Okay, you need to take care of that if it's your life depends on it type of problem. But most of your emails are going to fall into 2 buckets. Things that you can reply to sometime this week, or things that you need to reply to sometime today. And so you can use labels in Gmail and Outlook to categorize just those 2 things. Don't categorize things by topic, categorize them by when they need a reply. Then back to step 2 of becoming indistractable, making time for traction. You should have time on your calendar to respond to emails. And you only respond to the emails that need a reply today in that time slot. Okay, so you're going from 70 emails per day to only having to reply to about 7 per day. Then once per week, you have a 3-hour time slot, or however time you need based on your email inflow, when you are replying to those emails that can wait a little while, that deserve a response sometime within the week. Now, by doing that, you think, well, aren't I just pushing aside the inevitable? I have to reply to those anyway, right? Not exactly, because what happens when you let emails wait a little while, what you will find is that they begin to decay. What do I mean by that? That many of those emails, up to 50% of the emails you receive, Harvard Business Review found you didn't need to receive. And so when you just give them a little time, as opposed to this stupid email ping pong game that we play to respond to every single email, if you just let stuff wait a little while, the stuff that's not urgent, you'll see that many times people solve stuff for themselves. They don't need a reply right away, or it gets crushed under the priority of something else that's more urgent. And so letting those emails simmer for a bit, the ones that can be replied to sometime this week, putting them into a label so that you can look at them later once per week, then you flush through that folder of emails that need to reply to sometime this week. That combination will save you a tremendous amount of time spent on email.
Definitely. And one other thing, I'm not sure if you've tried this. I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. But creating a filter in Gmail where you filter out all emails or you auto read them if they have the word unsubscribe in them. I found that kind of just gets rid of all marketing emails for the most part. And you can check them if you want, but they will not kind of get your attention because they're already checked.
Sure. Yeah. If there's all kinds of tools out there, I use a product called Sane Later, which kind of does that automatically, not only with newsletters, but any suspicious content that may not be super urgent. As long as there's nothing wrong with this stuff, right? I'm not anti-Facebook. I'm not anti-newsletters. I'm not anti the internet, reading news, whatever it is that you want to do. I want you to do if it's consistent with your values, but I want you to do it on your schedule, not on somebody else's.
Awesome. And so the last question I have for you is just in terms of whenever we look at building an indistractable kind of life, what are some things that we could do to really live more in tune with our values?
Yeah, so it starts by defining what are those values. And a lot of people start with your mission statements or your 5-year plan or all that. I'm not a big fan of that technique because it's a lot of work, frankly. What I recommend is to turn your values into time. And so this utilizes this technique called time boxing, which is very, very effective. Thousands of studies have found this technique is a great way to make sure you do what it is you say you're going to do and to prevent distraction. So what I want you to do, and I'll give you a link that you can share with everyone, is to just make a template of what your week looks like. Okay. I don't need a vision board. I don't need a 5-year plan. Let's start with next week. Okay. And put on next week the things that are important for you to do in your life, which includes the practicalities of life, the admin duties, right? You need time to shower. You need time to eat. You need time to commute. Put those things on your calendar as well, okay? Then start with the values that you have. Turn those values into time. And I talk about these in 3 domains. You have the domain of you have your relationships, and then you have your work. Now, for most people, they start with work, right? And then their family, their friends, and they only get whatever time is left over. That's in reverse. We have to start with the you category. If one of your values is to take care of your physical health, do you have time for proper sleep? Do you have time on your calendar for exercise? Those things are important. Put them on your calendar. Then in the relationship domain, do you have time planned to spend with your kids or with your significant other or with your friends? That kind of stuff is incredibly important. We need to take care of that stuff so that we can be our best selves at work. And then finally, in the work domain, what are the important things you need to get done? So of course you need to get done email and meetings and things like that. That's the kind of stuff that, people let conquer their day. And those are what I call the reactive tasks. What about the reflective tasks? Do you need time to think? Do you need time to strategize? Do you need time to concentrate? Well, that has to be on your calendar as well, or it's not going to happen. So we want to make sure that we reserve time to live out our values by turning our values into time, by making time for traction. And so that's a very, very important step. And then the last thing we want to do is we want to synchronize our calendar. So this is called schedule syncing. So by sitting down with our boss and saying, hey, here's what we're going to do for the week. Here's what I'm planning to do. Is this in line? Here's the stuff I couldn't fit into my calendar for this week. Should we reprioritize something? It takes 15 minutes. It will revolutionize your work life. Same thing goes with our spouse, our significant other. Sitting down for just 10 minutes with your significant other. This saved my marriage because now my wife and I have this agreement around, okay, what does our week look like? What are our responsibilities? And then we get it done. I've been married for 18 years and it has made my life so much better. I'm in the best shape of my life. I've never been in better physical health. I've had the best relationship I've ever had in the 18 years I've been married. I have a great relationship now with my daughter, much better than before. And I'm more productive than ever because I use these techniques to become indistractable.
Amazing. And I know for some of those things, for some of the folks listening, whenever it comes down to like time boxing, time with your partner, it may sound weird, but it's something I do as well. And it's incredible when you just have that time set aside. You can check out of work for whatever day that is during the work week if you want to have a date night, and you both have that expectation. So it just makes it super easy to live a life based on your values. So with that, I think we're going to end the conversation. But I just wanted to say thank you so much, Nir, for taking the time to really kind of guide us through just how to build indistractable lives and also how to help our customers in ways where we can help them identify like what are those pain points and how we can solve them, whether it's with our product or our services or any of those number of different things. So thank you so much for your time. And for those of those that don't know too much about you, like where can they find out more?
Sure. So my website is nirandfar.com. Nir is spelled like my first name, so Nir and far.com. And my first book is called Hooked, How to Build Habit-Forming Products. And my second book is called Indistractable, How to Control Your Attention and Choose Your Life. And if you go to indistractable.com, we actually have a free video. There's an 80-page workbook that we couldn't fit into the original book, so you can get that free online as well. All that's at indistractable.com.